Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. This is day 3 of the final day of the symposium. And on behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we would like to thank all our sponsors who have sponsored the symposium this year. Please keep a lookout for a very special survey that we'll be sending out shortly. In the meantime, let me thank our sponsors, Deloitte Informatica, Privacy Analytics, CDOIQ, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Santel Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Garage, Okira, Pylog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global ID, Snowflake, and Starburst. Please take a chance to go to Content Hub, see what content they have, download that, and if you get a chance, reach out to our partners. Without our partners, we would not be able to hold a symposium. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in 2021.
Hey Ed, many thanks indeed, and welcome everyone to our afternoon session 17B. I believe Ed, you and your panel are going to be talking about the public sector CDO journey and changing the tires at 90 miles an hour, a very dangerous thing to do, and don't do this on your own. Ed, I will pass it over to you.
Great, thank you, Robert. I welcome everyone to our session. I hope you're enjoying the symposium. There's been a lot of great information that's been provided and shared. You know, today's panel represents the public sector, and the public sector has similar but different challenges to private sector CDOs. So we thought today you'd get an opportunity to hear some great insights from some very talented and successful data pioneers within their individual state. So my name is Ed Kelly. I am the Chief Data Officer for the state of Texas. And with me today, I'm gonna actually let them introduce themselves a little bit, but I'll give them their names. We have Adita Karkera from the state of Arkansas. We had Poonam Soans from the state of New Jersey, and Kathryn Helms from the state of Oregon. So we're distributed around the country. We all have interesting opportunities within our states, and you'll get a chance to hear it all today. So what we're going to do from a format perspective is we have some pre-prepared questions for the panel. I'm going to talk to the questions and then call out an individual to speak to them, and we'll all actually comment on them, representing our state's perspective. So I'm going to start off with Adita, and we're going to say, what it is briefly, can you tell the audience how your officer position came to be, the role that you particularly have, and where it reports within your organization?
Thank you, Ed. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're logged in from the world. It's great to be on here today. And Poonam and Kathryn and Ed, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. So let's get started. Adita Karkera, Deputy Chief Data Officer with the state of Arkansas. I've been in this role for about 3 years now and have been with the state government for about 20 years. In fact, this is my 20th year with the state now. So, being here for a long time and have had the privilege to work with different people, different technologies, and different governments. So really excited to be here. Now, coming back to your question, Ed, on how the position of the CDO got started for Arkansas. The CDO position was legislatively created for Arkansas in 2017. Act 912 of 2017 actually created that position for us. It not only created the position of the Chief Data Officer, but together with that, it also created the position of the Chief Privacy Officer for us. So it laid down the roles and responsibilities for both those positions. And our very first Chief Data Officer for the state of Arkansas was our very own Dr. Richard Wong. So happy and excited that he laid down an excellent foundation for us. And then I was appointed in 2017 as well to serve as a deputy to him. Besides creating the roles of the Chief Data Officer and the Chief Privacy Officer, this legislation in 2017 also created a state data and transparency panel. And what it did was, it's pretty much an executive data governance board at a high level. So it has membership from our executive leadership from different state agencies and departments, but together with just the public sector, it also has representatives from the private sector, and then also representatives from the governor's office, from the Senate and the House. So it's really a pretty good cross-sectional team put together to provide that executive governance on a state level. So yeah, 3 years in the position. And the position was created by legislation. I'm trying to think the other last question that you had, where do we report to? The Office of the CDO, when it was created in 2017, was set up to report to the state CIO. But with Governor Hutchinson's recent transformation for state government, the position today reports up to the Secretary of Transformation and Shared Services. So just a little bit twist there, but the roles, responsibilities, and the office remains the same.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so let's go now to Poonam.
Hi, Ed. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on this panel. My position was created also in 2017, and I was made Chief Data Officer last year. So I'm very new to this position, but I have been working with data since 2014, and I set up the New Jersey Open Data Portal, which is why I believe I got this role. My office reports to the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, and I work for the NJ Office of Information Technology.
Great, thank you. And Kathryn.
Hi, folks. I'm Kathryn Darnell Helms. I'm the Chief Data Officer for the state of Oregon. You'll hear a lot of commonality. So my position was created in 2017 as part of a House Bill, House Bill 3361. And the primary focus of that House Bill was to, one, create the Chief Data Officer role, and then also create a formal legislative mandate around open data and data governance. So there are some very key tasks associated with my position that have been created as part of that legislation. I think you'll probably hear that common thread. So data governance, open data, and then of course, creating the state's first enterprise data strategy. In terms of where I report to within the organization, I report to the state CIO, who then reports to the governor. So in terms of our actual appointment authority, I'm fairly close to and enjoy a fairly positive relationship with the governor's office as well, just by virtue of the fact that the state CIO reports directly to her.
Great, thank you very much. And I guess from our perspective of Texas, I have actually a couple of years on these ladies. In 2015, the position was created by our legislature, and it provided actually the creation of a position called the Statewide Data Coordinator. My role reports into the Department of Information Technology. It is a technology-focused organization sharing and developing procurements for the state of Texas. I reported to the state CIO, but now he retired and I report to the executive director. So very excited again to be a part of this group and to be able to kind of walk through some more discussion here. So I'm going to move to our second question. And Kathryn, you are on my screen, so I'm going to ask you first, but what would you consider to be the hardest challenge that you had to overcome in your role?
Well, I would say actually the decentralization and autonomy of state agencies can really make enterprise level efforts challenging. So for those of you who are not aware, Oregon's state motto is "She flies with her own wings." And I think each agency really kind of takes that to heart. So even looking at within the state CIO's office, we are not necessarily, we are more of a policy making body and a policy issuing body. And we provide some oversight and IT governance, but agencies are really left to their own devices when it comes to determining how they want to implement internal data policies, architecting their own systems, procuring their own software solutions, determining where they want to necessarily host, if they want to go cloud. All of those solutions or options are really provided to the state agencies internally, and those decisions are left to those business lines and their state CIOs as well, which I think is excellent for agencies that are very mature. So we have some superstar agencies. The Oregon Department of Transportation is one of them. They have a very mature data governance policy. They've been pursuing their own internal data strategy, but we have approximately 84 executive branch agencies, and there's a huge range of staffing, right, all the way up to 20,000 employees in our Department of Human Services, to 10 to 20 to 30 employees in some of our smaller boards and commissions. So the fact that there are all of these pockets of maturity makes it really challenging to set policy and provide guidance in a way to say, okay, well, let's work with both an agency who is brand new to data, brand new to the language of data and data governance, with an agency who has been doing this for a decade, right? So far longer than the CDO position has existed. So making sure that you give space to innovate, and then at the same time, create some of those baseline standards associated with governance and management.
Great, thank you. Poonam, how about your hardest obstacle or challenge that you've had to face?
So the hardest obstacle is getting other state agencies to share their data with us and just trust in us that we will do a good job of publishing it and keeping it secure. The governor did set out an open data initiative in 2017, instructing all agencies to publish their data on the open data portal. That really did help a lot. And initially we had some great excitement and all the agencies were, ready to publish their data. But soon they realized there was this one loophole which said, if you have your own website where you publish the same data, you could just connect to that one. So now, of course, you know how agencies are, they just decided, okay, just why don't you link to ours instead of us coming to you, you could just come to us. So that to me is the biggest challenge I find.
Okay, great. Adita, how about you? Any challenges in Arkansas?
Yeah, I'm thinking like, where do I start from? So there have been challenges as is expected with any CDO role, right, and CDO office, right? But I think I got to say that just influencing and building that positive data culture in the state has probably been our biggest challenge. So let me explain what I mean by that. So when I started in this position back in 2017, one of the first things we started off with was like a listening tour of all our departments and our agencies. We started talking to the leadership of each agency to try to understand what are your data needs, what are your gaps, what are your pain points, where are the gaps in data and data management really. And what we started to hear was a lot of, hey, this is my data, this is mine, and this is yours. And even though I want yours, I'm not willing to share mine. So some of that sentiment led us to go further into analysis of, hey, let's try to get deeper into this gap analysis. What are the issues? And what came out of that gap analysis is that data sharing and lack of governance, lack of data governance, were two big glaring issues on the forefront of almost every agency. So we started engaging further with other departments, and that's how we started to realize that there is a need to continue to work on changing that data culture, right? So started engaging more and more with these departments and agencies and slowly trying to find out who the data champions or who the data cheerleaders were in each agency, who really understood the needs, who understood the data management needs and the governance needs of their agency's data, and try to identify those. So that engagement really helped us move from that barrier of, hey, this is my data, and get into our data, this is the state's data, and start the data sharing culture. Also, what we did was we went out and said to our data and transparency panel that we really need to identify an existing employee who is currently serving in whatever position, but hey, let's identify a central point of contact for your agency to be called your agency's data officer. And that really helped us accelerate the data culture needs and started more collaboration between the agencies and caused a major shift in the culture for us. So today we have agency data officers identified in our agencies and departments, and they have become my central point of contact around the state departments, because it's difficult to just do the job of a CDO up here by yourself when everybody else you don't have a direct connection. Thinking that you will be able to engage with a director or an executive leader all the time is not really practical. So having these agency data officers identified and working in collaboration with you, creating those relationships really helped me change the culture. And then we said, let's start getting them to the table And although we had the data transparency panel at the very top, we said, let's go ahead and create a data governance committee of these agency data officers to start to get them to engage more and start kind of getting into that carrot or stick. Let's talk about the carrot. What's in it for them? Get them to the table and start engaging more and more with us. So I guess that all of those steps with the gap analysis, the data and transparency panel, the governance committee, the agency data officers, I think all of that led to our culture being an impediment back in 2017 to really culture being an accelerator for us today. So I really think that changing that mindset has been our hardest challenge, but feel pretty good about where we stand today.
Great, excellent. You know, each one of you talked about a challenge, and I think I've had all three. You know, we certainly have a decentralized government model in Texas, and it has caused challenges because I think a lot of ways, my role and position, it's all influence, it's all partnership, it's all the ability to kind of work with individuals to encourage them to take a look at data and their data management program and formalize it and put more structure on it. So in that way, we've been a lot like Oregon. On the open data portal side, there are loopholes in our situation too, like in New Jersey. And we've actually had situations where people have decided to pull off data and to leverage their own personal website. Although we are actually starting to get the people involved in lots of other things that are happening with our open data portal as well. And then we also have had the challenge of my data. As a matter of fact, I have a call tomorrow with a state agency, their data officer, their agency CDO, asked me, Ed, I'm relatively new and I'm getting pushback because everybody wants to keep it as my data. So we're going to strategize about how we can help them be able to be successful in turning it and maybe leverage some of the examples that Adita just shared in the discussion. By the way, Adita, I think we're having some feedback issues on your network. Maybe if next time we ask you to speak, if you turn off your video and just speak, that might help going forward. So great. All right, the next question is the reverse. So we just talked about the hardest challenge. What about success? And I guess, what does success mean to each of you? What is your greatest success to date in your particular role? And I think we'll start with Poonam.
So the greatest success I think I had was when we moved the transparency platform, the governor's transparency site, from an in-house built Apex platform that was being maintained by 10 software developers onto the cloud platform. We did this back in 2014, so we were one of the early cloud adopters, and a lot of agencies were still very skeptical of the cloud. But we had great success. So we went from a staff of 10 to a staff of only 3. And we've been doing a great job of that ever since.
Hey, Ed, I'm sorry to interrupt. Poonam, we seem to be having some problems with your audio, and it could be the same problem, it could be network issues. Could we maybe ask you to unplug and plug in and maybe turn off your video just to see if it improves it? So that would be great.
Is it any better now?
Not much. Can you just go try turn off video and just tell them doing a quick, check, sound check.
Is this better?
No, unfortunately, unless Kathryn and Ed are hearing something different, I'm wondering, we have put a phone number into the text chat. If it's possible, could maybe I ask Ed to ask Kathryn to kind of continue that discussion, and then have you and Adita dial in through the phone numbers?
Sure.
You can see your participant ID and invite link numbers, the meeting ID, all that stuff up in the upper left-hand corner of the Zoom room, where the eye in the circle information button is. So if you call one of those phone numbers and then use your meeting ID, then you can call in through the phone.
Great. Well, while they're getting back into the discussion, Kathryn, would you like to address your greatest success and what success means to you?
Sure. So I really stick to the traditional adage that data governance's overall goal is to get the right data to the right people at the right time. So when I think about success for the entire state of Oregon, much of what I'm considering is, are agencies at a place internally with their own governance that, one, the right data is getting to the right people at the right time? And then secondly, are they building those strong interagency relationships to be able to share data with one another? And I think we've already heard some about kind of the cultural challenges associated with data sharing that come up. So as I work with agencies, I really try to articulate that as the overall goal, that we can get to the point as an enterprise where we can come to the table as a team and say, okay, well, we are responding to an incident, right? It's not like we haven't had any global pandemics or other large scale incidents happening already within our state and our nation and our world. But when we have these incidents take place, or when we have something that requires all of us to be able to move quickly, do we have access to the data that we need to make those decisions? Do we know who's responsible for that data? And do we have a secure place to share that information? So much of the articulation that I have for this is focused kind of on that core vision for authoritative data being made available to all state agencies and all individuals who need access to it or have permission to access it. In terms of current success, so I started in January of 2019. So I've been in my position for a little under 2 years. And I would say that my core success so far has actually been the creation of the state data strategy. So we're still in a draft stage, but I've really been impressed with the partnership and leadership that the other state agencies have shown as we start working on this data strategy. I was able to create an advisory group to help steward this strategy through the process. We followed the federal data strategy model of identifying some principles associated with how we want to manage our data, some best practices, and now we're in the process of determining our annual or biennial action plan. And I've been really, as I said, impressed with the fact that most of the research directors that I placed the call to responded, and that they've also come ready to do this work. And I think our visions are surprisingly aligned. So it's been really kind of a wonderful experience to know that as I sit and think about these enterprise issues associated with the state, I think most of the agencies themselves have also been sitting going, you know, it would be great if we could really think about an authoritative single source of truth. It'd be really great if we could have an enterprise data inventory. So a lot of that vision is already taking place within the state. So it was nice to sit together and see all of those things align.
Yeah, that's a great description there of success. I think that really sums up a lot about an overall program. I guess my perspective in Texas is success to me means that I'm not the only one talking about this particular topic, that effectively I'm now through a van as well as agency leadership are now talking about the importance of data as a strategic asset, to be able to come through and recognize that they're hiring positions so that they effectively can take what we've built as kind of the framework and the tools and be able to then leverage that in building their own individualized programs. Another element of success, I wouldn't say, I don't know if it's my greatest success to date, but I will say one success that's been valuable is that we created with the State Agency Coordinating Council, a legal group, a bunch of lawyers. I went to them and asked them, is it possible to create one single data sharing agreement that all agencies can use? A lot of them didn't think it could happen, but we had some great cooperation from general counsels of our Health and Human Services Commission. We've had our Department of Public Safety. We had our Workforce Commission, and of course our general counsel. But those individuals helped draft. After 6 months, we came out with a document which we felt would help create more efficiency and effectiveness around data sharing in compliance with the federal and state laws in managing and securing data. So that launched about 2 years ago, and it was like the quietest launch you would ever hear. But over the last 6 months, I would say, and particularly the relevance around a focus on data with the addressing it from the COVID perspective, we have started to see more and more organizations sign up and use that document. We also have had institutions of higher education use it. We've also shared it with our local government and they've started to use it. So it's very fulfilling to see that you've started out something and it took a while to get to be usable. But my motto is patience and persistence. If you work in the public sector, you have to be patient sometimes because things don't move as fast. And you have to be persistent because you're the only one that's basically pushing the agenda on it. And you have to make sure that people understand the value proposition associated with what you're offering up for tools or products or just general service associated with your overall program. So Poonam is back and Adita is back. Can you hear us? Just a sound check.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. And Adita, can you hear us? I think she might have dropped off, so perhaps she's going to try to get back on. While we're waiting for her to come back, we do have a first question from the audience. So I want to kind of deviate off our set of questions and bring this one up and just pitch it to everybody, all the panelists, whoever would like to start it off. The question is, what are some strategies to transform and anonymize data to enable sharing with partners or across the enterprise? Anybody would like to take that? Welcome back.
So Ed, I'm happy to chat about some of the work that Oregon is undertaking with regards to privacy specifically. And then I'd love to hear more about because I know other states have chief privacy officers. So we're in the process of building a legislative concept for our chief privacy officer right now. And much of that is determining how we build relationships and responsibilities between the chief data officer and the privacy officer. In terms of how we've been approaching privacy right now, it's actually been from a providing guidance for open data specifically. So just a quick plug, Data SF, the open data program for the city and county of San Francisco, has an amazing privacy toolkit that is publicly available. And much of what we've built internally is based on that. And there's actually like a large inventory of all of the different elements of stripping PII that can take place, or aggregation, or adding statistical noise. So the guidance that we provide agencies is, one, obviously look for any sort of federal guidance that currently exists, right? So with HIPAA, you've got the safe harbor method, and then they have a full de-identification protocol identified with certain elements that have to be stripped out. And then the other area that we tell folks to look at is, of course, the overall like utility of the data, and then what is necessary in terms of preventing re-identification. So I think it's something like 60% of folks can effectively be re-identified with just a date of birth, a zip code, and I think there's a third piece, and I don't remember what it is, but it doesn't take very much to re-identify folks when you have voter registration and other publicly accessible records. So when we talk about anonymization for data sharing, much of it is, what is the likelihood that a person is going to be re-identified, and how do we do an overall risk-benefit analysis associated with sharing that data? Of course, that's in the context of publicly accessible data. For internal practices, what we tend to do is then build matching engines where the PII layer is actually stripped at the time that it's made available through a data warehouse. So you might have 2 or 3 key individuals who are using PII to match different entities. And then at the time that that data is actually shared, all that's given out is a client ID.
Excellent. Excellent. Anyone else like to add in? Okay. Great. Well, we're starting to get some really great questions in, so I am really going to go off script and address these questions because I think it's real valuable for the audience. So the next one is, what resources did you use as a starting point for creating your overall data strategy, goals, and plan going forward? And Adita, you're up because I see you on my screen. So.
Can you hear me okay now, Ed?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. All right.
So I think the question was around how did we decide our priorities for the data strategy?
Yeah, what resources did you use as a starting point to create your overall strategy, goals, and plan?
I think for us, the need was driven from our stakeholders. We started with the analysis and the discussions with our immediate stakeholders. Like I said, you know, the state leadership and the state data officers, we started the discussions with them and started to think of what are our most critical needs? What are the needs that we need to address first? Because like I said, you know, the role of the CDO is so broad. The expectations from the Office of the Chief Data Officer are so broad. But we have to narrow it down to what the need of the hour is. And everything has to be business outcomes driven, right? You know, you have to, whatever step you take has to be driven for a specific business outcome. So we had to sit down with our stakeholders, whether it was through design thinking workshops or whether it was just through communications through these committees and panels, and start to get together as a group as a whole for the statewide perspective that what is it that we want to solve? What business problems do we want to address first before we start defining our data strategy? And I know, Kathryn, you've done a tremendous lot of work for creating the official data strategy for Oregon. So congratulations on that, and would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to touch on it very quickly. So first, I guess I owe a lot of thanks to the leadership associated with the federal data strategy, because really looking at their model, when I was in the process of developing our data strategy, I sort of presented my advisory group with two options. One was we can look at the federal data strategy as a model for how we'd like to do this, or we can go kind of a more traditional route and try to do an enterprise gap analysis and then determine what the areas are associated with maturity that we need to start setting goals toward. And I think the overwhelming response was really that the federal data strategy made the most sense, partially because as we've mentioned, the CDO role is fairly abstracted from the actual trenches of data work, right? So I don't have any specific data analysts, and I know there's a question later about resourcing, but I don't actually have any like data analysts that report to me. So instead, it's all through influence and relationship building, kind of like what Ed has mentioned. So the idea that we could come to the table and determine what do we want these overall principles and kind of these large, high-level visions for how we want to manage and use our data really made sense. And I think it's been effective as creating that sort of North Star. We're in a public comment period right now with these principles and practices, and we've actually seen some really wonderful response, sort of a mix between I don't agree with any of these, or these are very high level, and then there's actually been some really wonderful detailed comment by comment, practice by practice. Here are my thoughts. This is what I in the private sector or in academia or as a state agency think about these principles and practices, and areas that I might recommend for either adjusting or iteration of these principles. So I'm really excited for our future workshops. We did contract with a vendor to provide some professional facilitation associated with these workshops. But really, I think a lot of that credit still belongs with the research directors and members of state agencies who came to the table and I think really helped guide that vision. One of our advisory group members just kind of day one in the workshop said, well, our data is a public good, and it needs to be used to improve the lives of Oregonians. And that, I think, really helped set the stage overall, where it was like, yeah, that is fundamentally why we're doing what we're doing. And I think it really helped create that valuable context.
Great.
Yeah, Kathryn, that's great insight. And I'm glad you brought up how you sort of follow the lead or borrow from the federal data strategy. And that's something else that I wanted to bring up. And I see another question lined up, which I can speak to in that regard. You know, when we started the idea of identifying existing employees to serve as agency data officers, we borrowed heavily from the federal data strategy and the Evidence Act as well, because that's what they were wanting to do for federal agencies and appoint data officers there. We just called them agency data officers for the sake of a name, but we borrowed heavily from that same idea and strategy that the feds are trying to do because it works. You know, having those data officers, even though it's not legislatively mandated, that really helps create the collaboration and the data sharing effort for the state.
Right. Thank you. Poonam, are you back online with us?
Yes.
Right.
So what we did was we set up the data governance. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
So we set up data governance first. It's echoing for me. Is it echoing?
Yeah, it's a little echo on our side. I'm going to mute
your
my
computer audio. Turn down the volume on your computer audio. You know, yeah, you turn down the volume there or mute that. You'll hear through the phone.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, so what we started was with data governance. We first put all our data together and said, these are the fields we want, these are the columns, this is going to be our column level metadata, this is going to be the asset level metadata. We set the formats on everything, and then we went to the state agencies and said, okay, we need the data in this format and in CSV format only, so that way we can upload it to our data platform. And that really helped us align everything together and get everything in place. We also had MOUs, which we had all state agencies sign, so that someone at the commissioner level was vouching for the data. Because again, data is only as good as, they can give us whatever data they want, but we don't know if it is really good data or bad data. So we had to have someone at the commissioner level at all agencies sign off on the data saying, yes, this is the correct data, that we are publishing for you. So that's how we went about publishing on New Jersey State Portal.
Excellent. Very good. Adita, I think you had a follow-up on the success question we had.
Yeah, Ed, I guess it's been really encouraging to hear Poonam and Kathryn and you talk about, what defines success for all of you. And I agree with all of it, because the challenges for us in the public sector are all sort of similar, right? Just different geographic locations. But I do want to add to that success to me and for the state, I think, was also defined by the adoption of the change in the data sharing and the change in the data culture, and seeing that organization change around the state landscape, not just in one agency, but the other agencies, because that to me was a good factor for assessing success. Again, comparing it 3 years ago from 2017 to now, not wanting to share data, not wanting to talk or discuss this as much, to today, it's almost like, hey, this is the cool kids blog, and hey, we want in. Everybody wants to be talking about data sharing. Everybody wants to be part of this effort. So I think that whole culture shift, I think that really defines success to me. And the other thing, a more tangible example of success for us has been actually getting our data catalog program going for Arkansas. And we started that, again, about 2.5 years ago, where the agencies did not have a full inventory of their data assets. So we were like, well, how are we going to start to manage, govern, do anything with the data assets when we don't even have an inventory of that, right? So we started to create a methodology of how they're going to start collecting this inventory, and we worked with different agencies to help them gather that data. And eventually today we have this data assets inventoried and managed in an online portal, which all of the agencies today are sharing. So I think that really helped us set some foundational grounds for building up on the governance program for the state. Because now we have not only the data sets, we have the classification that goes for the data set, we have the data steward names. Is it perfect today? No, it's not. But I think we've come a long way from where we started to at least having something tangible that is usable not just by one agency, but is usable across the state landscape. So I think that is something that we're happy about. We're continuing to improve it. We're still doing annual reviews on it to continue to enrich the data. But I think that's been one successful, tangible example of success.
Yeah, and I actually can concur with a lot of that. This whole process is a very iterative journey. It is a fact that it takes time to be able to move through the process, get people on board. And what also we're often challenged with here in Texas is the roll-off of people. So I have some great sponsors in different agencies who really loved this particular topic and were evangelists in their own right. And then they left and moved off into different roles or out of state government. So it's almost like you have to start all over again. You have to start with a brand new group of people. You have to continue to build relationships with those new people to rebuild or, kind of reinsure them that basically the program is here. So I want to move on to another question real quick. This is from Ryan Smith. He's a proud Oregonian. Is that how you say it, Kathryn? And he wanted to say, he asked, have other states, do we know of other states, also designated agency data officers? He commented that he really loves this approach, supportive of a non-invasive data governance principle of elevating existing data advocates. So in your conversations with other state CDOs, have you found that they've been doing this to your knowledge?
I can take that, Ed. I know Connecticut, I believe, has legislatively got agency data officers appointed. I don't know for sure if they're called agency data officers, but a parallel position or role. They may be called data coordinators. I can't remember for sure, but I think Connecticut does have some legislation to that effect. I want to say Arizona perhaps has data coordinators assigned as well, but those are the only two states that I know about. And then Arkansas not having that as a legislative mandate, but just more of a community inspired role.
Yeah. Poonam or Kathryn, do you have any insight into some of the other states' activity?
So Oregon is currently exploring legislation associated with agency data officers, partially because we are in the process of working to create that chief privacy officer legislation. And so the conversation has been, well, if we're creating data protection roles, should we also be creating some sort of data governance role? We're still exploring what that legislation will look like. My hope is really to create a single kind of authoritative appointment of some kind following that non-invasive data governance capability, because right now what we have are open data coordinators, we have lead data stewards, we have technical data owners, we have kind of this glut of titles, and there isn't necessarily a clear articulation of what level that person should be at, how much authority they should have, and then when they should be kind of participating in these larger enterprise discussions. So the intent behind our legislative concept is to explore how we can kind of create that leadership role to add a little bit more structure and authority around how we're managing data.
Excellent.
In New Jersey, we do have accountability officers at each state agency. So they're the ones who report to us, and they're the ones responsible for all the data. They're also the subject matter experts on all data sets provided to us.
Right, so what we've heard, I guess, is some, different titles or different areas of responsibility, but each of us has got the startup of this process. It's interesting, in Texas, last session, we tried to put in legislation that identified agency data officers. However, it didn't pass. But what's happened is they all know that in this upcoming legislative session, we may take another run at having some dialogue with the legislature about possibly putting something in place on that. But agencies have started to hire to this position already and get geared up. I actually offer my services to sit on the interview panel board of agencies, so that when an agency data officer is selected, I've already built up a kind of a relationship with them. And in the last two agencies, they've hired an individual who now comes to be a part of our data management council, which is the strategic group of CDOs throughout Texas agencies and higher education that meet to talk about some of these other bigger components, bigger pieces of what's going on. And I keep in touch with them and help them in any way I can as they develop their individual programs. So really, I think it's a real valuable resource. I'm hoping that we can get some more traction on it in the upcoming legislative session. Question here, just what size is the team available to support your data efforts? So I'll start off. I have one person who is my open data portal administrator, and that's it. And everything else is matrixed. I do have a very good agency, and I have a great amount of resources within this agency that I can tap, who provide support at any time. So I'm very appreciative of our agency leadership and the support of all the program directors, so that they offer up support and help throughout. So anyone, Poonam, you're up on my screen. So you have anything?
In New Jersey, yes. In New Jersey, I have 3 direct reports, but just like you, Ed, I have a lot of teams. I have the ETL team, the data warehouse team, and a lot of IT developers that are always ready to assist.
Okay. Kathryn, how about your team? How many people you got? I think you said you had 10, 15?
Oh, I wish. No, I have 6, and I do have a policy option package, so a request for additional resources, really hoping to build some of those data skill sets. So my position is new, but I actually inherited staff from different functions within our agency. So I have a transparency program coordinator that is sort of an older statute that we're trying to work through some cleanup on, associated with creating a website for government transparency, which is kind of a large bucket. And has been utilized as a bit of a legislative shopping list right now, where every session there's one specific data set that a legislator is interested in, and they try to kind of stick it into the transparency statute. So we've been looking forward to kind of regrouping and saying, okay, well, if we have this larger open data mandate, how do we architect kind of a strong vision of proactive transparency universally, rather than sticking to this like piece by piece, I want this data set and that data set, but really kind of think about a strategic motion forward. And then I've also, our state geographic enterprise office sits within my agency. So I actually do have a GIO role right now. And then I also have 3 or 4 staff associated with that office. So I have a mix of folks who are more on the strategic kind of data governance side. Oregon's geospatial team, I would say, and Oregon's kind of GIS community is incredibly strong and very capable. And I really owe a lot to them in terms of leadership that they've already established. So one of the things that they have is what they call the framework program, which is all of the geospatial coordinators within state agencies, or the GIS analysts, have gotten together and identified priority data sets that they need stewarded as an authoritative data resource. And they have appointed data stewards within agencies who take on the role of saying, I'm responsible for this data. I recognize that there are quality standards associated with it, and I will work to publish that authoritative, high quality data. So we've got some really wonderful communities built in within data governance already that I'm hoping to kind of expand out just beyond the geospatial world. And then the hope is to bring on, as I said, about 6 or 7 more staff within the next biennium, assuming that I can get approval to create those roles, because I'd love to see more kind of ETL development. And then many of our agencies don't have any sort of data analyst or data roles at all. I think my staff and maybe one other person are the only Python developers I know. So getting skill sets in to help create some of those data pipelines is really important.
Excellent. Excellent. So Adita, how about your staff? And also, I think you might want to address the next question. Someone addressed it in the chat to you. So I'll let you take both of those.
Sure. As far as staffing, the Office of the CDO here reports in the Department of Transformation and Shared Services, and for that reason, we have tried to leverage shared services for all our needs. So if we had a need for BI, if we had a need for ETL, we're able to leverage some of those shared resources, irrespective of them not sitting in the CDO office physically. We're still able to leverage resources as needed from within the department. So whether it's GIS or BI or ETL or governance, so that has worked out really well for us so far. Now, as far as the next question, I think the question is, how much success have you had working across the branches of government? And I'm guessing that the question is more branches like local, state, county, and federal. I'm guessing that's kind of where this is headed, and not necessarily different state agencies or departments. So, the city of Little Rock works closely with us, the CDO over at the city of Little Rock, and does have a great relationship. We've had the opportunity to work with the county government quite some, especially on a project around mental health and criminal justice. And actually, let me just take the example of that mental health project, because that was an area, the project really is around a jail diversion program. So people who are dealing with mental health crisis, who come in contact with law enforcement for petty offenses for going into jail. And to kind of avert them from going there, a program called Crisis Stabilization Units was started by Governor Hutchinson. Well, in support of that program, I had the privilege to work with different levels of government. It was city, local, law enforcement officers, the judicial system, the county government, the county judges, the hospital association. You know, so different branches of government came into play for that. And I think that was a great example of bringing together different government levels for community good. So that was a perfect example to show that different branches of government can still work together and contribute to this data ecosystem for public good, right? And I thought that worked very well, and it still continues to work well today. I haven't had the opportunity to work much with the federal level. However, the state CDO network had organized a session where the federal CIO at that time, Suzette Kent, had come in and given a talk to the state CDO network, and I was fortunate to be part of that panel discussion with her and some other state and city CDOs. So there is more need for further collaboration between the federal government and the state government CDOs, I believe, but all of the interaction with all other branches of government has only been positive, but there's so much more to do.
Definitely so much more to do. We have about 9 minutes left, and I have actually one question from our prepared list I'd like to ask each of you. I think it's just important, you know, we have individuals, I think, in the audience, probably public sector and private sector CDOs that are relatively new to their position. What's the one piece of advice you would give a fellow CDO who is just starting out? What would that be, Adita?
I have got to say that focus on building relationships. Start with understanding your stakeholders, understand your community partners, understand your business partners, your customers, understand their pain points. And then having those relationships is what's going to help you move forward in your CDO journey. Because you really, I mean, just talk about COVID-19, right? Having those relationships with all of those key partners around different agencies or around, you know, different branches of government is what really helped us accelerate our response during COVID-19 data needs. You don't want to be making introductions during a time of crisis. You know, you want to have built those relationships beforehand and be able to build on top of those. So if there's a new CDO starting on their journey, I say focus on people, focus on processes, technology will follow, but people skills are really, really important.
Great, thank you. Poonam, how about you? What advice would you give a fellow CDO?
I would say build a strong team. So when I say strong, I don't mean just by the degrees that they have, because it doesn't matter how many degrees someone has, they need to have a good work ethic, and they need to be able to innovate and imagine, think outside the box. So build a strong team of people, have strong data governance, have a strong vision, which you write down, and then go for it. Because a lot of people, they have a great plan and they set up a good team and everything else is there, but they are too scared to take the next step. So I also say go for it, and then you will succeed eventually if you have the right people around you.
That's great advice. I really like that. Kathryn, how about you? What advice would you give?
I would definitely underscore both of the previous comments. I think relationship building, especially if you're looking at a public sector CDO role, you're talking about hundreds of lines of businesses, and you're talking not just about a single work culture, but each agency has their own unique community and work culture, and you really have to understand each of those components. But I think universally as well with the CDO role, especially again in the public sector, most of my work has been in the public sector, so that's sort of what I focus on. CDOs are generally tasked with the same 3 to 4 things in their first few years, right? So you've heard data sharing, open data, data governance, and we have, I think, over 30 state chief data officers at this point. So if you're just starting out, one thing I would say is don't reinvent the wheel. You don't need to start from scratch, especially with any of these policies or any of these frameworks. You don't need to necessarily build your own strategy in a vacuum. There are a lot of tools available publicly. I think there's tons of toolkits and public sector and public interest groups who have published a lot of guidance around things like data governance and open data. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to leverage toolkits that have already been created, which I think also then means that you kind of are on like a quick start pathway to get a lot of that work done within the first few years.
Yeah, excellent. And I would definitely underscore all three of you and what you said. You know, one of the things that I've always tried to encourage people who come into this particular role, particularly at the agency level, is become visible, become instantly visible within your organization, meet with your business partners, get to know, as Kathryn said, or one of the panelists said, the pain points. Understand that you're there to help and have a servant's heart. I think that's extremely important in private sector. The ability to kind of recognize that you're going to put your particular ego aside, you're going to put your maybe even your plan aside, and really try to focus with the individual on helping them be successful. Because I think if you can do that, you gain the credibility, you gain the respect, and then when you start to lay through your program further and further, it becomes easier. It becomes an easier sell overall, I think, to the community that which you work. The other thing, I think we didn't talk much about it on this call, but data literacy is extremely important. Teaching, providing mechanisms, forums for others to teach each other. We have in Texas, a Texas Enterprise Information Management group where we encourage individual agencies to get up and talk about their success, to share what they've done, to kind of highlight what's going on. And then we put those individuals together with other agencies that are about to go down that pathway. So get into a literacy kind of habit of trying to at least start small with training and education amongst your own community, and then bring in formal education if you can, or develop it. We initially developed a series of 12 videos, small, short vignettes on the principles within the DAMA methodology. It was by any means no Tarantino or Cecil B. DeMille production, but I think it really got the point across as far as naming and common vocabulary and lots of things that people were unaware of. So as we in Texas continue to increase our maturity of our program and our agency's program, literacy is going to become more and more important, and things that we're trying to do at the state level on the behalf of everybody within government is kind of where we're going to head this year and focus our attention. So I have about 3 minutes left. A final question here. How do you tackle the CultureEats Strategy mindset? Anybody would like to do a quick address that question? CultureEats Strategy. In other words, we've always done it this way, so we don't want to do it your way.
I think that's absolutely why when we talk about things that a CDO needs to do, the first thing is build relationships. So specifically speaking from the public sector perspective, when my position was first created, there was a lot of, I don't even know what the heck this person is supposed to do. Are they just coming to take my data? Are they just going to come and put it all in a warehouse? Am I going to lose access to my resources? And so I think being really clear, my first, I would say 6 months within the role were really kind of pounding the pavement, just asking to speak to anyone who worked with data. I had a one-pager about what my mandate was, what the expectations were. And I'm also fairly gentle in terms of policy mandates. So rather than saying everyone has to do X, I established a lot of work groups and pilot groups and say, does this work for you? Will this actually fit in your agency culture? And if it won't, how do we create something that's flexible and useful enough for you to affect change within your own agency? So our data governance policy, for example, is not at all specific in terms of how an authority structure for data is created, only that there needs to be a clearly documented authority structure. For some agencies, that is a massive interrelated data governance body with executive leadership. And then for some agencies, there are only 30 people in the office. So convening a data governance body of 10 people is ridiculous. It just doesn't make any sort of logistical sense. So in that realm, we usually advise them to either add it as a standing meeting to any sort of, or a standing item to any sort of executive meetings, or to just discuss whether or not they need to create like a smaller body or work group or have a single person kind of drive that change. And I think ultimately that is kind of the core challenge for a lot of CDOs, is that ultimately the culture itself is what impacts how you're able to effectuate change.
Excellent. So I'm getting the big high sign that I think we're done with our time here, but I just real quickly want to thank each of you for your insights and for your time today. This has been some really good discussion, and we could go on because there's lots more to talk about going forward, but I'll pass it back to Robert.
Ed and Poonam, Adita, and Kathryn, on behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Society for 2020 Virtual Symposium, we thank you. If I can leave you all with a thought, you've got a lot of content that, and you mentioned about sharing policies, sharing strategies. Can we maybe look to continue this conversation through various methods, and obviously look to have you come back again next year if there's interest? I know there's lots of questions on there, but I think that, a continual journey would be certainly something that I think our attendees would be interested in. So, Ed, I'll leave that with you to think on.
Okay.
We'd like to thank all the speakers for giving up their time, preparation. I know we had a couple of microphone issues at the beginning. That solved itself out, so thank you indeed for working with us on that. Thanks, Rod, on that. So we are good, and thank you indeed for making this symposium a great success.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Rod.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. Take now.